determine what we're going to run. Okay? So let's pretend, very beginning, we've just been given our topic. You don't have any of this evidence in front of you. How would you start to come up with ideas? What would the very beginning step be with a topic? What would you have to do first? You'd have to come up with a plan. How do you get there, though? Do you remember what I said? How did I find the plan? What did I have to do? I'll give you a hint. Look at page 9 in the workshop manual. The very first little thing under number 1. You have to research, right? I don't know. I remember I told you that I had no idea how GMOs worked in Japan. So that first thing I had to figure out was, what's going on with GMOs in Japan? So you have to start out at the very beginning. Research. So read what you did last night. Except you got to skip the hard part of finding it all. Okay? So we read. So we've read a whole bunch of stuff. What you did last night. Now what do you do? What would you do now? What's the next step?
Then you came up with some idea,
Mm-hmm.
and you think about the important and useful things for your plan. Then you make a plan
Mm-hmm.
and try to solve the problem.
Right, exactly. So you've got an idea, right? We've done the research, we have an idea. We now take that idea and we make it into a plan. And then we find out, well, what are the good things that will happen from plan? And how do I use evidence to tell that story? Okay? So, how do you structure the app case? Can I tell you the good things that happen before I tell you how I'm going to do anything? No. Right? So, the very first thing you want to do, don't look at the screen when it's moving, Duck, is tell us what's happening now. Okay? You want to tell the judge the inherency. What is happening? What is causing the problem, right? So we got to know that. I have to establish what's going on in the world today. So that's the second page in the evidence. Okay. Now, all right, so how am I going to fix this problem? Well, that's the plan. It is a very decisive step. It is, we are going to do this. Okay? So in the case of GMOs, we're going to ban them. You can't have them in Japan. Okay? So that comes after you. So tell me what's going on. Tell me how you're going to fix it. Right? Well, then what do you need to do? You tell me how you're going to fix it.
And then you want to solve the problem.
Tell me how you solve the problem. How does this plan fix it? So you have to tell me solvency. Quit giggling at me. Oh, okay. So how does it solve? Can you win if you don't solve the problem? No. So you have to ensure you tell them, this is how I solve. So you have to find other people that agree with you, right? And use their words to say, this is what we should do, and this is how we should do it. Okay? Well, then what do we do? All right, we know what's happening. We know what we're going to do to solve it. We've told them that we're solving it. What do I do now? What's the next thing?
Maybe
You've been reading evidence. That's what these cards are. These are your evidence. So you've been reading evidence all this time. What do I do after I say, I've solved the problem?
then pick up the important
So
subject.
the good things, right? Yeah, the advantages. So you got to find, this is the other part where you have to read. Why is banning GMOs a good thing? What can we do? And then you pick out the ones that you think are really interesting, that you like to talk about. I love to talk about the environment. Hence, I wrote one that's about water and the ecosystem, right? Because I find that fun. So I like to research it.
That's something that we really can't emphasize the importance of enough. It is so important for you to choose things that you're interested in. That's one of the reasons we wanted to give you options as to what you would read in these debates. Because no matter how much evidence you have, debate is always going to be a persuasive activity, okay? So if you have a position that you don't really care about, your judge is going to be able to tell. Your judge will pick up on it. And if you're advocating for this position and you don't care about it, why should I, as your judge, care about it? On the other hand, if Shanna is debating against me, I'm not interested in my positions and I don't care. But Shanna is talking about the environment and ecosystems, and she is very excited about it and pumped that she has this plan that we can use to solve these problems. The judge is going to feel a lot more strongly about Shanna because of the way she's presenting the material and the way she feels about it than compared to me, right? There is some perception here. So always pick the things that you are interested in the most.
Actually, when I give these kinds of talks, I generally like to start off by saying that debate is about 80% psychology. It's about 80% psychology, which means that your opponent could have the best evidence, the best arguments, but you could still beat them in a debate competition. And that's because if you sound like you are convincing, if you sound like you're interested in what you're doing, if you sound confident, chances are that's going to communicate to your judges. So all of you in here speak pretty good English. You all are absorbing this information at a very rapid rate. And so all of you should, when you have your debates on Friday, should come in with a lot of confidence because you are doing remarkable work. Just in one day, you all have done remarkable work. So on Friday, you should come in, you should be excited and confident in your positions. And I always used to tell my debaters that the round begins when you get off the van, we travel to tournaments in vans, because a judge who you might have later on in the tournament might see you in the hallway, and the way you conduct yourself and the way you act can always influence the judge's perception of you. So it's really important to not just focus on the evidence and the arguments, but also focus on the psychological aspects.
Always, even if you feel like you don't know what you're talking about, act like you know what you're talking about. You are correct. 100%. You have no doubt in your mind. Even if there is doubt, get rid of it.
In the US, we say, fake it until you make it, okay? Pretend. Make it seem like your case, your positions are so much better than your opponents. Even if you don't think it's true in here, act like it out here.
You remember how you said that you didn't, that you had to say that we should be able to talk on our phones when we're driving. But personally, you don't agree with that, right? So that's that, you have to get over that and be willing to say something that you're not 100% sure is right, or that you don't 100% agree with. You gotta just be willing to just own it. Make sense? Okay. All right, so yeah, so you pick the advantages. So you wanna make sure that you have something you like to talk about so that you also don't get bored reading it. All right, so that's how you construct a case. You're going to want multiple advantages so that you don't have to run the exact same thing every time you debate, right? That way it's always a little new for you too. So write more than one, write a couple.
And we have 3, right?
Yep, we have 3. I was almost to make a 4, and Dr. Z told me I had to quit. He's like, no, stop it. So yeah, we have 3. I've had cases that I've had 6 or 7 different advantages, and I would just pick and choose which ones I wanted to run. So, whatever I was feeling that day. Okay, so what else should you write? Should you just stop here? I've written my advantages, I'm done? Or should you write more? What should you write? Well, if you look at the table of contents, don't look until I get to the top, Dr. Z. All right, you see where it says backup evidence? So if they make answers to the aquatic ecosystem, or small farmers, or the Japan soft power advantage, whichever one you're reading, you have extra evidence to reinforce what you've already said. So you want to make sure that you think, so as you're writing this advantage, okay? Sit there and think, if I was the negative, what would I say against my case? How would I answer it? Okay? And then make sure that you have answers to those arguments so that you can be as prepared as possible walking into a debate round. That way you're not sitting there during prep time going, I have no idea what to say. You have it already, so you can just be like, my responses are, and just read them. So it takes off a lot of the pressure. The more work you do outside of the round, the easier the round is itself. Have you ever heard of always be over-prepared? Be prepared for anything? You heard that before? Like if you're gonna go traveling or go camping, they say, even if the weather says it's supposed to be shiny, prepare for rain. This is basically what you're doing. You wanna have absolutely everything you could possibly think you need in case of any emergency. Over-prepared. Okay?
And since it's your affirmative case, it's essentially like having infinite prep time, infinite preparation time, because you can do all this work before the tournament actually begins. The negative does not have that luxury because they don't know what they're going to be debating specifically. They know what the topic area is, but they don't know what the specific area is. So you have, if you're affirmative, you have that advantage.
So you always want to be looking for it. All right, so how can you plan out and write out everything you're going to say in every single one of these speeches? Is it even possible? No. You could not write this speech before the round happened, right? Because you don't know what's going to be said all the way back here until this happens. But that's where your research helps you prepare for this. If you have all of your research done, you have everything you're going to eventually need to say. What order you say it in may change, but you'll have everything you need, right? Because you've already done all the research. You know the topic. You know your case. You could defend your case in your sleep and win the round because you know it that well. So you need to know that while you can't write out this speech the way you can the first speech, you still should have everything you need. So what you want to do, prepare. And then the other way is to make your other speeches for the affirmative the easiest possible, is make sure that you make your case really strong. You sit there, and what I like to do is, when I would debate, I would go and find one of my friends or my parents when I was writing a new case, and I would say, I'm going to read this to you. And I want you to ask me every single question you can think of. And I want you to tell me every single problem you can come up with. And these were people that didn't know about debate, okay? And then I would go back and I would fix that. So I would let them find the problems for me, right? so that I already knew, oh, where am I weak? Where could the negative beat me? Fix that, and so I would have an even stronger case, so that when I went to the debate tournament, my opponents wouldn't have a very easy time because I'd made their job really hard because I'd already tested it out. Kind of like taking a car for a test drive. I already made sure that there were no kinks in it that I knew of. So that's a really good thing to do, is to have someone who doesn't know debate listen to what you're telling them so that they can find some possible holes for you. So that is the affirmative. I'm going to let Jake talk about the negative, but first, what questions, that's a lot of information. What questions do you have?
Should we anticipate the speech of second negative speech and first negative
Right here?
to speech it in order to prepare for speech of one era?
You should. As they're making an argument, you think of something, write it down so you don't forget. Okay? You want to make sure though that you're not just writing answers, but also listening to what they're saying. Because if you don't listen to them, you'll probably miss something really important that they're going to catch you on here. So you want to make it's kind of tricky. This is where you have to learn to listen to what they're saying and also be writing answers at the same time. It's a lot.
Yeah. That is the hardest part of debate, in my opinion, is being in the debate round and keeping track of everything that's going on. If you are just doing one thing, if you're not the person who is speaking and you're sitting and listening, if you are just doing one thing, you aren't doing enough. If you are just listening, you should be writing some answers down. If you are just focusing on how to answer, you should be listening. It's learning how to do multiple things at once. And it is tough, but it is a skill that will help you for the rest of your life.
And I imagine it's particularly challenging for folks who debate in English, and English is not their first language. And you should all be comfortable though, and know that if you have your translating machines and that sort of thing, that's fine. And even when we've had debates here in the past, and someone's kind of really searching for that one word and they're having difficulty, if the partner wants to help you, or we could even pause the debate for a minute, because this obviously will help improve your English, but that's not what the primary function of debate is. All right? It's not just to learn English. It's to develop these other skills that are really, really valuable. And let me also just say one thing about that. When you are on break time, and when you go to lunch, and when you hang out with each other at night, you should try to speak English. Because the more you speak it, the easier it will be for you in these debates.
Do we want to do what affirmative ideas for the GMO topic are there? Or just going to?
Probably just go on with the negative.
Oh.
Okay.
It's pretty straightforward.
So, Shannon was in charge of preparing preparing evidence for the affirmative side of the debate. I was in charge of constructing the negative arguments because that's what I think is most fun. So, you will see.
And scroll down, it's in there somewhere.
If you go to your table of contents for the negative side, that's about halfway through your packet.
That is kind of dizzying to watch. That is dizzying to watch. You're almost there.
Almost. There we go. Okay. So, Dr. Z said earlier, from the affirmative side of things, you have this idea of infinite prep time, where you can do all of this research and really prepare your affirmative case as best as you can, because you know what the affirmative is, you know what the debate's going to be about, so you can really build that up. So what about the negative? What does the negative get to do? Now, before you walk into a debate round, you might have a general idea of what the affirmative team is going to do because of the topic, because of the resolution, but you won't know specifically what their plan is going to be. So, how do we, as negative debaters, get around this issue? What do you think we should do? Yeah. What is the first thing you should do when you are trying to prepare negative arguments?
Well, you research also.
Exactly. Chances are, any problem that you have in debate can be solved with more research. It's always what you do. If you have a question that needs to be answered, research. If you want to look for more arguments to write, you research. And if you want to prepare yourself for arguments that other people might read, you have to research. Now, the good thing here is that chances are you have the same access to evidence and articles that your opponents do who are preparing affirmative cases, right? So you will see the articles that they're using to write their affirmatives. Like we've said, Shanna found her plan within one of these background articles that we gave you. If I'm a negative researcher and I'm going through and I see that plan, see something like it, you have to think, this could be something that an affirmative team would use. And the first thing that you should do as you are preparing to go into negative debates is read articles like this and think of potential plans that people might offer. Now with a resolution like this, where it says Japan should prohibit, and it gives you the sale, import, and production of GMOs, now most plans are going to be pretty similar, right? They are going to ban GMOs. So researching for something like this is a little easier. Plans can only do so much. Other topics, it can be a little difficult. So it does depend on the topic, but we're going to focus on this right now.
What should you be doing when you're crafting your affirmative case? What should you also be doing while you're writing that? Looking at what? The negative arguments against it, right? So that you can make your affirmative really strong. So you're kind of doing both research at the same time. So what I do if I have to cut both sides, okay, so let's say I'm having to cut all the evidence, I'll write my affirmative, but I'll start saving things away that I'm like, I will come back to you for the negative. And like while I was researching, I wanted to make sure I had a strong case, so I would come across negative arguments, and I knew Jake was writing it, so I would send him the article, and I was like, here you go, here's an argument against my case. So that, because I found it, and so I shared it. So you always want to make sure that you know both sides so you're not surprised by anything.
I have a question.
Mhm.
When you make in some tournament, so you know before that you are affirmative and that Jake is negative, but do you change? Like for example, he's becoming again affirmative and you become negative.
Yeah, so let's say round one, we hit each other, okay? And Jake's negative and I'm affirmative round one. And then it comes to round two. For some reason, we're hitting each other again. Jake would be negative, and Jake would be affirmative, and I would be negative. So every round you have, you switch sides. So you have to be able to argue both sides. You have to know both of them. You don't just get to be affirmative the entire tournament. That'd be too easy.
And in fact, on Friday, you will be debating both sides.
So when you're starting to prepare these negative arguments, you are looking for the way that the plan can function, right? So we know here that the plan is going to do something to ban GMOs in Japan. Pretend we had a different resolution. Pretend our resolution was that the Japanese government should reduce smoking rights in Japan. Well, there are a lot of different things that you could do. You could increase the minimum age for smoking. You could take cigarettes out of the vending machines. I know we've used this example yesterday, but it's the best thing I can think of. There are a lot of different things that the Japanese government could do to get rid of cigarettes, right? But I know as a negative debater that somehow the affirmative team is going to reduce smoking in Japan. They're going to do something to reduce the size of the tobacco industry. Something like that is going to happen. So this general idea is how you start to guide your research, okay? So you will see, and the disadvantages that I have here, for example, this Japanese politics disadvantage. Right. And we'll talk a little bit more about the components of a disadvantage in a second, but you'll see that this piece of evidence talks about how there are very powerful political groups who want to get rid of GMOs in Japan. So no matter what the affirmative does, as long as they are reducing GMOs in Japan, I can use my disadvantage, okay? So this is the type of thing that we might call a generic link. It can apply to any affirmative plan that follows the resolution. Now, the hard part for the negative then is as you go through debate tournaments, as you hear different versions of different affirmative plans, you will be able to get more specific because you'll get a list of different plans that people are using, right? Now, once you have that list of plans, you can write more specific disadvantages for individual plans. When you are starting out though, and you just have a resolution to guide you, and you're just doing that research, you want to craft disadvantages like this that will apply to any affirmative. Does that make sense? Okay. Questions? Okay. Now, just like Shanna said, when you are doing your research for the negative, you want to make sure that you are researching things that you are interested in. So Shanna was interested in finding arguments about the environment. So she wrote a marine ecosystems advantage. I'm interested in politics, and I was excited to learn more about the nature of Japanese politics. So I have a disadvantage about Japanese politics. Make sure, again, that it's something that you're interested in. That's why we wanted to give you these choices. Okay? So, yes?
I have a question. If Shanna is talking about the maritime and you made an disadvantage of politics, and you do not know you don't have any knowledge about the environment, yes? So how are you going to?
Right. That's where debate gets a little tricky for the negative, and that's why when Shannon and I began talking about these things, we wanted to tell you that you can't just rely on evidence. Okay? Evidence is great. Evidence is fantastic. You should always have it. You should always read it. But it is never enough to just read evidence in a debate round, because there will always be some arguments that you're not prepared for. When this happens, what you need to do is take a step back from worrying about the fact that you don't have evidence or that you weren't prepared for exactly this argument, and just sit and look at their position. Look at the maritime position. So if it were me, and I was reading this ecosystems advantage, and I didn't have any evidence about it, I had no idea. Okay. She has this argument that says GMOs use pesticides that pollute water. Well, there are probably other things that pollute the water other than just pesticides, right? There are probably people, fishermen, who don't know how to properly take care of their environment. There are other forms of pollutants that go into the water. There are lots of other things. So I can still make arguments using these examples without that evidence. Okay? And that's the best way, is taking a step back and thinking about, is their advantage logical? Does it make sense? And if not, you attack it where it doesn't make sense.
The other thing is, remember what Professor Zompetti said, where which scenario is more likely? Are we more likely to save the entire environment by stopping GMOs in one country? Or are we more likely to have a problem where Abe gets more approval because the farmers in Japan are like, yes, you're doing what we want. We'll support you for whatever you decide. And so he gets to rearm the country. Which one's more likely? Even if you don't say a thing about the maritime, like directly to it, you can just ask, put that out there. What's gonna happen? Which story makes sense to you? And then explain. So, there's some things that go, disadvantages take a little bit extra work. I always think the negative is a little bit harder because it takes a lot more work than an affirmative to write, okay? So Jake's gonna explain what goes into the disadvantage, which is those off-case arguments that we make for you that you have.
Now, your packet on page 9 will list a bunch of different types of off-case positions the negative can prepare, okay? Now, we are going to really focus for this workshop on disadvantage, which is the most simple, but also, in my opinion, the most powerful negative position. Disadvantages are fantastic. They are easy to understand, they are easy to read, and they will make your life so much easier on the negative. Other positions, sometimes you could propose a counter plan and say, the affirmative concerns are valid, but we have a better way of solving, and you propose a counter plan. Sometimes if you think that the affirmative has nothing to do with the resolution, say we have this topic about banning GMOs, and Shanna stands up and says, you know what, we're going to ban smoking in Japan.
Does smoking have anything to do with GMOs? No.
It doesn't. I'm not prepared for that, so we would say she doesn't fall under the topic. She's not topical. This is a position called topicality, okay? So it's important to be aware of these positions, but for this workshop, what we really want you to get to know is the disadvantage, okay? So first, we're going to think about, though, the affirmative advantage, okay? Now, we structure an affirmative case by saying, this is what's wrong with the status quo. This is what that's going to cause. This is the bad impact that will happen, the harm if we don't fix this problem, and see how this is how we fix the problem, okay? And that's how advantages go.
I think our advantages were
they have those components.
Yes.
They might be, those are the 3 components of an advantage. A disadvantage also has 3 general components, okay? So the first one is this issue called uniqueness. So we're going to use this Abe politics disadvantage we've been talking about, okay? So if you look in your evidence packet, or I also have it up here on the projector, this first piece of evidence is the uniqueness evidence. Abe's approval is dropping now. Without an economic focus, he will lose leadership, okay? What this piece of evidence is doing is describing the status quo, just like you would do on the affirmative. The difference, though, is that on the affirmative, you say the status quo is a problem. On the negative, when you have this uniqueness argument, you're saying the status quo is just fine. Okay, this is a good thing, the negative would say. Okay? We need to do this because with the disadvantage, we are trying to prove that the affirmative team causes something bad to happen. All right? So in order to do that, we have to first establish that everything is fine now. If we don't do that, if the affirmative can prove that everything is already terrible now, that means that, well, the plan must not cause it. If it is already something that's happening, the plan must not be the thing that caused it to happen, right? Does that make sense?
It's just like the inherency for case. It is what is going on now.
Okay. So that is uniqueness. It is the first piece of evidence, the first part of a disadvantage. The second part is called the link. This is the most important part of a disadvantage. This is, how does the affirmative plan mess with the status quo, right? Sorry, I can't do this. Oh. All right. So, we have something that says, right now, Abe's approval is dropping. The public is starting to not like Prime Minister Abe. But if the plan happens, powerful agricultural lobbies in Japan will rally behind Abe because they like the plan. He will get that popularity back. Okay? So the link is an explanation of how does the plan cause the status quo to change. Right?
So like here it says, these farmers can turn talk into action. So the farmers of Japan that are part of these lobbies, so these groups that try to get the government to do something, they are so powerful in Japan, according to this, that they can convince people that they can convince people of what they want. So they could convince people to like Abe. They can go out there and it would be like coming up to Dr. Z and saying, Dr. Z, Abe's fantastic. Dr. Z going, I don't think so. No, really, Dr. Z. Abe's amazing. You gotta love him. And he's like, oh, okay. I mean, there's more into it than that. But this says that they have the ability, if they're happy, to make other people happy.
So, if uniqueness is saying that right now everything is fine, the link is saying, but if plan happens, all of that gets messed up. Okay, all of that's ruined. Are you with me so far? Good? Okay. So the last part of a disadvantage is the impact. So this is the question of, okay, why do we care? Why do we care if Prime Minister Abe gets to stay in power and is popular again? Well, for the purposes of this disadvantage, we say, if Prime Minister Abe gets a bunch of popularity again, he is going to pursue collective security. He will cause Japan to rearm and repeal Article 9 of the Constitution, and that destroys our relationship with China and South Korea. So,
May I ask a question?
of course,
When should we talk about disadvantages in this debate?
the disadvantage that you read, if it's this politics disadvantage or if you choose one of the others, should be the first position that you read in your first negative speech. The first negative constructive, the first thing you do is present your off-case position. So present the disadvantage. Okay? Now, at some point in the block, just one of these speakers should talk about the disadvantage. We recommend that it be the first negative rebuttal. If you think that it needs more time than just 3 minutes to explain it and to win the argument, you might want to give it to the second negative speaker. But as a general rule, your first negative speaker should talk about the off-case position in the block. Okay?
Thank you very much.
Of course.
So I want to just confirm. So you talk on about this three disadvantages, but you do not talk anything about the bad things of affirmative. Those things will be told by second.
Oh. Well, you would, the way this works is you would present, you would present probably just one disadvantage, and the rest of the time that you have in that speech, you would talk about the plan, or talk about the case.
So let's say you're the one in C, okay? And you choose to read this. A, B, and C. It takes you 4 minutes to read it. You still have 2 minutes in your speech. So now what you want to do is you want to go and make arguments about the case. you use that 2 minutes to now make other arguments that are specific to the arguments the affirmative made. So in the marine ecosystems, that's where you would use these 2 minutes to read arguments about the marine ecosystems and GMOs, and that's where you can start the arguments of it's not likely to happen or something like that. Let's do. Make sense? Okay.
And there is evidence right in the packet to answer
Yes.
the one issue.
We, as far as I remember, we cut answers to everything for everybody.
And that's the next step that I was going to talk about, okay? When you are beginning to do negative research, you need to look out for these off-case positions, and you construct them like we've talked about. But the next thing you need to do is you need to look at potential advantages that your opponents might run on the affirmative. So, for example, I know from reading these background articles that an affirmative team might say, we need to ban GMOs because they are bad for your health. You remember reading this? Okay, so at that point you need to think, I need to answer this advantage. So you go out and you construct pieces of evidence, you cut cards, like we talked about yesterday, that say, GMOs are not bad for your health, or GMOs are good for your health, or there are other things that mess with your health even more than GMOs that the plan doesn't solve. Anything that can reduce the harms of the AF as much as possible, okay? So, first thing you do when you're researching for the negative is look for these off-case positions, like disadvantages, and then you start to look at what are potential advantages that my opponent might read, and you find pieces of evidence that respond to those, okay? Often, case arguments like this are constructed in a format like this. They can be read simply as, I have a piece of evidence that refutes a part of your advantage, okay? They might not tell a story the way these arguments do, but they're still worth reading to put pressure on the affirmative team. So, when you are constructing this speech, you're thinking about what you want to do, you need to have an off-case position ready to go, and then you need to find a way to respond to the affirmative team's case. Find ways that they don't solve their problems, the harms that they discussed, and find reasons that their advantages aren't a big deal. Okay? Now, when you are constructing this speech, you need to be thinking all the way forward to this speech. Just like how an affirmative speaker, an affirmative team, reads this plan knowing, in this whole case, knowing that this is what they're going to have to win in this speech, you construct this first negative constructive to give you anything that you might need to win this debate round here. So if I'm the second negative speaker, and I know that my best evidence, the thing that I am best at debating, is this politics disadvantage about Prime Minister Abe, I need to make sure that that is put in this speech. Okay? Think about, what am I best at doing? Where is my best evidence? And constructing your first negative constructive to best enable you to nail this speech. Okay? To do a very good job.
Also be thinking, what do you understand the best? So let's say you don't understand this DA, okay? You don't get it, but you understand a different one that's in the packet. Run the other one. It's just as good. So you need to make sure that you can tell the story, that you don't have to look at your evidence, but you could just tell us what happens in your own words. Okay? So that's what you want to ensure you can do with all of your arguments before you even read the evidence, is that you know what it's saying, and you could explain it to me. Like Jake and I can explain this story without even looking at the cards, right? We'll talk about this. How many times never actually read the card to you? Because we know the story. It's just like with the affirmative, you have to know what the affirmative does so you can explain it and tell a story.
So, one of your homework assignment for this evening is going to be preparing these constructive speeches, okay, with your partners. So, it's one of the reasons why we asked you to look through the evidence packet yesterday, look through it as a whole, so that as we're talking about these things, you can tell what you're going to be most interested in or feel the most comfortable with. Because you're not going to read all of those arguments. You simply don't have time. So, while you are trying to put these speeches together, you can select the things that you think you would do the best job with, that you feel the most comfortable with, or you think has the best evidence.
Well, and you should also talk with your partner about which speaker position you want. And then try to come up with an agreement as to what kind of arguments you both want to use in the debates on Friday. So why don't we do this? Are you pretty much done? Okay.
Yeah.
So why don't we take a 20-minute break, and then you come back, and then we will tell you who your partners are, and then you can start working with them. And take advantage of the time this afternoon after this break, because we're here and we can help you. If it's maybe a concept that you're having trouble with, or you want our advice about something, ask us. Okay?